In this video, we're looking at the three types of focus and how focus interacts with your senses. Consciously playing with your focus and different types of attention adds yet another layer. I like to think of it as like a lens on a camera where you can adjust the information that's coming in and how you're experiencing it. The first type of focus I called soft and wide. This is like the panoramic view on a camera. And this is an all-encompassing, sort of relaxed, neutral, fully present and fully aware stance. So this is the foundation of the stance that we went over in the last module. With this soft and wide, all of your senses are on board. You're very aware of your internal world, and you're also aware of the connection to you and the world around you. Often we've had this experience while walking in nature when we have this feeling of expansion, and yet we're able to also pick up little subtleties that are around also. This soft and wide stance is particularly useful and actually necessary when we're in that sort of jazz improv mindset, when we're with groups or when we're in life and we're wanting to be able to respond to what wants to happen. I want to take a minute and just make a distinction here between mindfulness and this soft and wide stance. Mindfulness, in the way that it's often practiced, is about being in the now. It's about bringing your attention to this moment. That is certainly part of the aspect of soft and wide. However, mindfulness tends to bring us into our internal experience. What are we feeling? What are we seeing? And while that's actually really very essential, it limits us when we're just focused inward and just on our experience. We also want to be able to have the gestalt of our relationship and our connection to the greater whole, and being able to have that soft and wide is the combination of that mindfulness awareness, as well as our connection in the wider expansive gestalt. So one of the ways to be able to drop into this soft and wide stance is we covered in the last module. It's where you are able to drop in, really relax deeply into your core of expression, into your uniqueness, be able to feel yourself as that column, and then widen that field around you, soften your edges, and be able to feel the world and the field of perception that's all around you. Alternatively, sometimes we're not able to do that, especially if we're in hyper-focus mode and we're getting shit done and we need to be able to navigate and broaden our stance and get out of that single focus. This, in fact, is a way to bring your single focus into that wider stance. So what you want to do is actually pick an object and be in that hyper-focused. Bring your attention to one object, and then slowly see if you can't expand your perception of it, widen your field. So what's a foot around the object? What's 3 feet around the object? Until you can finally feel around you yourself as the center of this 360 sort of view degrees around you. One of the advantages to this stance is also, instead of it feeling like you have all this information coming in and bombarding you and this chaotic feeling of too many channels open, it's really interesting how it tends to then instead give us this gestalt sense of one experience, and we end up then being able to feel like these waves of experiencing that are sort of washing over us, rather than feeling like the empath that's completely overloaded and overwhelmed. So being able to be in this soft and wide stance, it's more like, oh, there's some emotion there that I feel in those people, or here's my experience of the crowd, and I can just be in it and allow it to just move around me, or like waves gently on the edges of our field. One of the skills that you want to be able to also cultivate while you're in this soft and wide stance is then being able to notice what you notice. And this is really a critical skill no matter what stance you're in or what focus you're in. Notice what you notice is all about paying attention to where your attention goes, what catches your attention, what has a lot of energy and is lighting up. Or what keeps showing up? Is there a pattern? I often hear people talk about numbers, that they keep seeing the same number, or 1111 coming up on the clock. So paying attention also to what emotions are coming up or what feelings are starting to move through you. So when you notice what you notice, then you have the opportunity to make a choice about, do you want to follow that, or do you want to just let it sort of be in observation and go back to the soft and wide. One of the things about noticing what you notice too is you don't have to know where the end goal is or what does it mean. Instead, another skill is to do what I call following the breadcrumbs. You don't have to see the whole destination. Instead, just one step at a time, you notice what you notice, and then you let that lead you to the next thought or the next place that your attention comes. Or you can shift focus and go into the second form of focus, which is this idea of zooming in. When you zoom in using the breadcrumb analogy, then you're able to say, notice what you notice and go into that and say, do I want to explore that? Do I want to see where that leads me? And then notice again where the next breadcrumb goes. With zooming in, similar to a zoom lens on a camera, we want to bring our attention to something specific. And we have to both make the choice to do that, and we also have to have some place that we want to zoom into. I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about directionality. One of the things that happens when people are starting to open, especially to the subtle senses, is that we tend to quiet the mind, we go into meditation, and we allow answers to flow to us. This is a really important skill, to be able to allow that information to flow or to just have insight and to be in that beingness. And it's particularly helpful in that allowing answers when we're not sure what the question is or where we should look. However, there's a whole other skill, which is being able to direct our consciousness into something. You can think of it as like an arrow, your consciousness going in as an arrow. Or I also think of it as just like you're reaching your hand out to touch something. Instead of reaching your hand out, you're reaching your mind out to feel it. It can take some practice, but there is an actual tangible experience of being able to bring and project your consciousness into something to feel it. This directionality also applies for this idea of going inward, what's happening in your body, in your mind, in your internal world, your sensations, your emotions, and listening to your inner voice, versus reaching out, maybe asking for guides or for God to have a prayer or to feel that, to reach into collective consciousness or to oneness. So again, there's this directionality that is part of using your focus. With the zooming in, it's really important that you have some idea of what you're zooming into. And one of the biggest limitations to using zooming in is just simply knowing where to look. So there's a bunch of places that that you can navigate and start with. For example, the physical. You can be looking at body language, how the person is dressed, their tone of their voice, your own physical body. You can zoom in on parts of your body. There's the energetic and emotional aspects. Is somebody's energy, are they high energy? Are they low energy? Is there some sort of energetic state that you can feel into? There's a whole bunch of maps of meaning, such as chakras and energy ley lines and things like that that you can also use to tune into. There's also parts of the person. Can you look at their soul, at their little girl, their little boy, or their humanness versus even a personality trait? We can tune into certain parts and say, why is that there, and get information or have a dialogue with that aspect. Also, we can do that for ourselves. Time is another big one that we often sort of fluidly move through, and we can consciously use it. We can bring ourselves into the now to get information, like with mindfulness. We can also bring our attention and project our consciousness into the past and actually re-experience something that happened in the past so that we can get additional insight. We can also go into the future or even step out of time altogether. One of the ways that we can do that, and another map of meaning, would be looking at other lifetimes or our soul's journey and being able to step beyond time and see ourselves as greater than just who we are in this moment. There's also the relational space. While we can look at the other person, we can look at ourselves, we can also look at the space between us. This can happen between two people, or it can also happen in a group. What are the dynamics? What does it feel like when you walk into a room, for example? You could also think of this as the field. Collective consciousness, cultures. There's all sorts of ways that we can take an idea and tune into it, or take a common cultural norm and tune into it. Using maps of meaning brings us to our third way of using our focus, which I call filtering. This is using a map of meaning or literally a filter or an intention that allows us to take our attention and focus on a certain aspect of it. So, for example, using a map of meaning of the chakras, we can scan somebody using that overlay, scan someone and see what's closed and what's open, or what do we need to notice, and notice what we notice as we scan their chakras. We can walk into a room and maybe we're a photographer and we have the principles of design as our filter, and we scan the room looking for that perfect composition for a photo. We can also just change our focus and say, we've played this game before of like, let me just look around the room and see, I'll only see red, only notice red things. That's a way of choosing a filter to say, I'm just going to bring my attention and my perception to red. There's also this idea too of filtering that's more of like focused presence, where you're both in sort of a combination hybrid of soft and wide, but also really focused and zoomed in. For example, if your child's upset, or if you're shifting into coach or facilitator mode, you can bring your attention to that individual, but you still have a softness and an openness and a sort of noticing what you notice as you're bringing your attention to them and letting everything else drop away. Maps of meaning are incredibly valuable when it comes to this filtering process. If we think of them as overlays that allow us to choose which layer we're going to look at or what filter we're going to use. So known systems, like we were just talking about, chakras, energy bodies, anatomy, models and frameworks, personality tests, the four forces are a particular map of meaning that allow you to see things with a certain perspective. Also expertise, there's the saying that if you have a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. Well, our expertise is a set of filters. It's a map of meaning that allows us to look at the world in a certain way. And that can be both a pro and it can also be a con. Also, we can't see or change what we don't know to look for. So one of the challenges with focus or being able to get information is simply not knowing where to look, or not being aware that we're being impacted by filters that are unconscious beliefs, for example, or even cultural norms, that there's things we take for granted in how we're seeing the world and how we're filtering it. So the more that we can be aware and conscious of all of these different levers and different ways of being able to make sense, and we'll be diving more into purpose and sense making and exploring these ideas of cultural norms and beliefs and models in future modules. But the more that we have sort of a toolkit and more tools in our toolbox and more maps of meaning that we can access, then we are able to have a much more rich and full experience of our world, and a lot more control over how we experience it.